Hey everybody, it's Kevin here. Today I wanted to talk to you about going virtual and getting yourself onto a live stream or onto the internet through Notch, whether you're just showing something you're making or you're actually designing a show for someone that is a virtual thing. There are a few ways that you can get yourself onto the internet, and I'm going to look at a couple of those today. So let's jump in and get started. So there are quite a few streaming services out there. Most of the time people have an idea of which one they want to get on, whether that's Facebook or YouTube, Twitch. There's numerous out there. So I'm going to look at probably the two most popular ones today, which is YouTube and Facebook. No matter what you do, they're pretty much all the same method. So once you can get onto one of them, it's the same method for getting onto any platform you'd like. So if we go and look at YouTube, basically you can hit, instead of uploading a video, going live. And what you can do is you can create a system for creating a live stream. Like you can enter all sorts of info about your stream. I just called mine test, the category it's in, and it gives you this screen to kind of start setting it up. Facebook is really similar. It usually starts with trying to access your webcam. And instead, if you scroll down, you can switch it to what's called stream keys. So all these systems will use something called a stream key, where basically it's a code that you can use, and it tells the server who you are in an encrypted way. So you can see it's hidden here by these dots. And what happens is everybody has a unique stream key. So you don't want to give yours out. If you share your stream key, what ends up happening is other people can actually post live videos to your channel, which might not be a good idea. So definitely make sure that you protect that key. Essentially what it is it's something that talks to the server that you're streaming to and identifies you. So it's kind of like your personal ID. That's all and well, but how do we actually get our feed from our Notch viewport here into the system? Well, Notch itself doesn't actually have streaming integrated or built in, so you have to go to another piece of software in order to stream out. There's a few options for doing this. There's a lot of different methods out there. I think one of the most popular ones that I usually see is OBS. So this is a open source, free to use streaming platform. This is actually the same system I use to record these tutorials. So you can not only stream, but you can also record. And it can access things like webcams, your desktop, capture cards, all sorts of good stuff. Recently I learned of something else called Streamlabs, and what they've done is they've actually packaged OBS into a more user-friendly tool. So for short, sometimes people will call this SLOBS or SLOBS, so Streamlabs. After trying them out, they're basically the same thing because they both use OBS at its core. I will say that Streamlabs, the UI is probably a bit nicer. I think they've built out a few things to make it easier to use, and it integrates better with like your kind of chat stream or chat interaction. They kind of built this tool for gamers that do streaming to people and want to be able to see people's comments and reactions as they watch them play. So it's up to you which one you prefer. I've downloaded both of them and I can open them up real quick. There are a few other options out there, like I've heard of Snapcam is another one, and I think Parallel or Portal was another interesting one where you could stream to more than one source at a time. The catch is though that when you're looking at these tools, in order to come out from Notch, you need to support either Spout or NDI or some type of capture card, right, to capture this feed and send it out. The thing about capture cards, which is how I'm recording this right now, it captures kind of your whole desktop, which is not ideal. And if you send this feed to a second monitor, then it's no longer in your builder view here in the view that you're looking at. So what I think is nicer is actually going into Notch and sending this frame out to Spout or NDI. So those are two different options that you can use to essentially share video on Windows machines. NDI is made by this company called NewTek. I don't think it's open source, but it's a code base that is free to use if it's for personal purposes and you're not selling a product made with it. And what you want to do with the NewTek is if you go into, I believe, NDI here, you want to download their NDI tools. And these are some useful tools that can help you troubleshoot any NDI issues. So like the Studio Monitor lets you view NDI streams. What NDI is it's network video. So it's sending video over the network, and it's a great way to send video between computers or streaming from one computer to multiple systems. And Notch supports an NDI input and output. So what you can effectively do is send out your Notch feed into other network tools that use NDI. So if you click download, you can go down here and download your NDI tools for Windows. So once you've done that, you can install the system, and it installs a few of these tools. And we'll look at these in a moment here. Another way to share video textures on a computer between programs is a system called Spout. And Spout is a system that is a little different than NewTek NDI in that NDI sends video over the network, whereas Spout is a texture share that happens on your graphics card. And what that means is Spout is limited in that it has to go from one program to another, and both of those programs must be on the same machine, and they must be running on the same graphics card for this to work. So those limitations aside, it has a couple of advantages in that it's much faster. So it's going to be lower latency than NDI because it's a direct texture share on your GPU. And it's going to be higher quality typically because you won't have to deal with any sort of compression that NDI adds onto it when sending over the network. It's literally a texture grab. So if you're okay working within those limitations, then Spout is definitely your preferred way to go. NDI, however, is more useful if you need to send it to different computers or if you need to share it over the network. You can send NDI from one machine back to itself. That's just called a loopback. So instead of going to the network, you go through the network interface and you just send it back to itself. The computer figures out how to route it to itself, basically. So these are the two main methods of sharing video out of Notch that I know of, at least. And let's take a look at both of them. So go ahead and download NDI, install that, download Spout. I think right here, download and install that as well. There's another tool here called Spout to NDI. I would download that as well because we'll take a look at that in a moment and do some comparisons. But basically what that does is it converts the Spout feed into NDI. So there's a lot of different ways to do these virtual connections and pass video data back and forth. So take a moment, download those tools. Once you've installed them, we'll continue on here. And I would also choose either OBS or Streamlabs to download and follow along as well. Personally, I still use OBS, but I would take a look at both and see which one works best for you. So I forgot to mention that for this system to work, you also need to actually add NDI into OBS. And someone has conveniently done that already. So they wrote a plugin that basically adds NDI features to OBS. So I would go ahead and make sure you download this plugin and install it as well. So it'll take you to the GitHub page, download the installer here, and then make sure that you have that set up too. So let's talk about getting the video out of Notch. I essentially want to get this viewport out into another one of these programs, either Spout or NDI, for me to then use into OBS or some other broadcasting software. So if you click on devices here and you hit video in camera connect settings, in here you can essentially check send to NDI and you can also check send to Spout. So these are two different ways. I wouldn't enable them unless you're actually doing this. They sometimes do have a little bit of a performance overhead, which we'll talk about in a moment. Up here, if you're using a webcam or some other camera, make sure that you have your capture enabled. So I'm just using a really basic Logitech webcam, and I have it set to 1920 by 1080 at 30 FPS. So this is important to note. I would also lock your project to the same resolution and frame rate. I think it's just a safe thing to do. So let's do that first before we enable anything. In your project settings, you'll want to go into rendering, as you probably know, and you want to set your output height and width to 1920 by 1080 or whatever resolution you'll be streaming at. And I usually set my output resizing from resize window overrides set size to scale filter output to window. What that does is instead of setting the resolution to how big your monitor view is here, you set it to this number and then scale it down to fit within here. So if I hit OK, you should see that down below here, the viewport and the project should both say 1920 by 1080. So that's good. We're rendering at 1080. And in your time properties here, I would limit your max FPS to 30. So that way you're not using any more resources than you have to if you're also streaming. And it also makes sure that all your effects run at a steady rate that matches what you're sending out. Whether you do some different number doesn't really matter that much. For people in Europe, you might be doing 25, for instance. As long as you set this to a static number, that should help you make things more predictable and your effects more consistent. So let's go back to devices, and now let's try sending out to NDI. This, in my mind, is a really easy test to do because the NDI toolkit is really well developed and is easy to see. So I'll check send to NDI and I'll hit OK. And it flashes there for a moment as it starts sending. And from our NDI tools earlier, we're going to want to open what's called Studio Monitor. So the NDI Studio Monitor is a great piece of kit. It's essentially a virtual monitor. And what it is it's something that lets you examine Notch sources. So you can see here, if you click this, you can choose between computers on the network. So my computer here is called K2. and it shows you this notch feed called Notch NDI Sender. And you can see that it's taking my notch visual here, and it's actually collecting it in NDI. So if I were to pause this and show a grid, for instance, that grid will also show up here because it takes whatever is in your viewport and passes it over. So pretty cool stuff. So once you've confirmed that NDI is showing up, you'll want to open up OBS or your streaming of choice as long as it supports NDI. And make sure that you have your NDI system installed properly. And a good way to check is if you hit this plus icon right here, you should be able to select an NDI source name. So sometimes this title can be a little different, but you essentially want this NDI selectable as a source. If it's not there, then you might need to double check your NDI add-on and that installation, make sure that that's all gravy. So if you select this, you can name this however. So I'll name this Notch NDI. And here you can basically select the source of your notch system. So if I click right here, it's K2 Notch NDI Sender, what we looked at earlier. And I'll just go ahead and hit OK. So what should happen is, there we go, this pops right up. Again, this is our notch feed here, so there's two of me now. And if I show the grid, this should also show up in your NDI feed. Excellent. So we have our NDI coming out of Notch, going into OBS, and now in OBS, we can actually use this to stream out. So you'll see there's a Start Streaming button. You won't be able to just start streaming. You'll have to go through the settings, and in your stream, basically connect it to your account of choice. So if you're going to YouTube, for instance, you'll have to connect your account or use a stream key. So let's say we click YouTube, for instance, and we go to primary YouTube ingest server. Here is where you would actually paste in your key. So if I go to where I had my key earlier, I'll copy that, and you'll want to paste that in and hit OK. So if I hit start streaming, this should now start sending video into my YouTube channel here. Sometimes it takes a moment, so let's wait a second and see. And sometimes you do have to troubleshoot this process. I've noticed that depending on the version of OBS or whatnot, this stream setting might not always be correct, but it seems like this is working. Something's popping up here, and there I am. So right now, this is going from Notch into OBS, and then it's being streamed onto YouTube here. And you'll notice there's a bit of latency. Like if I move around, you're not going to move around completely. That's because it's going through YouTube servers, and they have to process it and look for copyright music and that sort of thing. And then it's going here. And then this live streaming view for YouTube, this is essentially a preview. So this isn't live yet. Once you're ready, you can hit go live here, but I recommend making sure that you check your audio quality, scope this on another computer, make sure your feed is coming through nice and crisp. So this is totally dependent on the level of your internet connection. So the same process applies to Facebook. I'll go ahead and hit stop streaming here. In your settings, you can basically change your stream service from YouTube to Facebook Live. It's the same idea. You would copy and paste your stream key from earlier, and then you'll show up over there. So same process, no matter what account or what system you're streaming to, it's the same idea. But let's look at some of the performance metrics now, which is something I've noticed actually when I was trying some of this out. So you'll notice that right now, we're getting a little bit of load on our GPU and CPU. I'm using a 2080 Ti, so showing an iMac feed really shouldn't be consuming this amount of resources. And if I want to test this, if I go back to video settings, notice we have like 4 and 8 right now. If I uncheck send to NDI and hit OK, you'll notice our computer CPU and GPU usage just dropped way down to 2 and 1. So NDI is not free. It does cost resources for Notch to be able to process it and then send it out. And if I hit OK, you'll notice this has gone up again. And that's just something I've noticed in general, is NDI does have a bit of overhead to run. It's not the lightest protocol, but it is extremely useful if you're sharing video across the network. Let's switch from NDI and try Spout instead. And here's where you'll notice something interesting. So if I check Spout Sender, I've turned off NDI and I hit OK. You'll notice that there's almost no GPU or CPU load. And you got to remember that's because of how these softwares work. So NDI, it actually has to process it and turn it into network video. Whereas Spout, it's a direct texture share on the graphics card. And so it consumes pretty much no resources on your computer. It's grabbing directly from essentially the VRAM of your GPU. I don't know if that's technically correct, but I believe that's how it works. So if we go to our Spout folder here, we find the installation. So Spout 2, once you've installed it, you should get a folder like this. If you also go through your programs, it should just open to this folder here actually. And a good way to test this is just like NDI, they have their own set of tools. And what you can test with is, I think in the demo, you can open up Spout Receiver. And if you double click that, you'll see that right now it's showing Notch Builder Spout Sender FPS 60. So we're getting a feed from Notch into Spout. So one thing I noticed is with Spout, because this resource load is lighter, I would actually recommend Spout as the way of sending this viewport out, especially if you're loading a pretty heavy scene or you need the resources. Spout seems to me to be much lighter on load as long as you're sharing within the same computer. Alternatively, with NDI, you could share the stream to a second computer, which you actually use to stream out. So separate your streaming computer from your Notch builder. It's an option. But that's why we also downloaded that Spout to NDI system earlier. And this is something that I think actually ends up being a bit lighter than sending NDI straight out of Notch. So if we also open up this Spout to NDI, we can actually convert this Spout stream into an NDI stream. It's getting complicated here. And if we open up that studio monitor again, we should still get an NDI feed. So I have a feeling that this is going to be the same amount of resources on your computer overall, but Notch at least is seeing less load, and this can be more useful if you're troubleshooting any performance issues or things like that. So you'll see here we're getting Spout, then Spout to NDI, and then we're checking out our NDI feed here. So feel free to do your own testing and figure out which method works best for you. In terms of using Spout, one catch is that Spout itself is a 32-bit system. So Streamlabs or OBS, what I was using is 64-bit, and so you're not going to be able to use Spout in the 64-bit version of OBS. So there's also a 32-bit version of OBS which you can download and use. And what happens is Spout actually shows up like a normal webcam. So if I open up 32-bit OBS, I'll just show you here, and you can try this on your own. If you click the plus here and we go down to video capture device, it's got the little camera icon, call this Spout. You can actually change from the webcam to your what's called a Spout cam, and that's something that's built into the Spout program. If you hit OK, you can see that it's essentially taking our Spout texture straight into OBS, and this workflow I would rank as probably the lightest in resource load since it's direct texture share and there's no NDI overhead involved. And with this same method, you can also, let me just double check my streaming settings, YouTube, okay. I hit start streaming. This should pop up eventually here as well. So again, it'll take a moment, but this is a really similar workflow to NDI. It's going Notch to Spout to OBS and then streaming versus Notch to NDI to OBS to streaming. So that's basically the basic. That's the basics of setting up how to stream. And now you should be able to stream to YouTube or to Facebook or to any other platform that you want. What I can also do is I'll just open up Streamlabs here really quickly for you to take a look at. So Streamlabs is literally the same thing as OBS. It's just packaged a little more nicely. And you can see here that I already had one. Let me remove this. So one cool thing about Streamlabs that I really liked is you don't actually have to add NDI on top of it. It's got it already built in as an NDI source here. What I also think is interesting, if you link your account, you can actually see what's happening in your feed. So here's some activity on my YouTube channel from the other day. And overall, I think some of the settings might just be a bit more user-friendly in terms of how they're set up and how they're shown here. It's totally up to you. I think I just keep using OBS because I'm used to it and it's what I already record with, but they're literally the same thing. So try them out, see which one you like more. But the idea is the same. So if we go back and look at our feed here, what I think is interesting about streaming from Notch is you can do some cool IMAG effects and stuff that you wouldn't be able to do if you were just streaming your webcam directly onto Facebook Live or directly onto YouTube. It's a simpler workflow, but you have less features of coolness. So one thing I made here is a little sample of just like what you can get up to when you stream from Notch or some other program. And you can use, IMAG effects and make yourself all digital, glitched out sort of thing. You can also add overlays, which I was really having a lot of fun with making. And so you can see I made this kind of HUD graphic overlay for my stream. It's live streaming. This is just like a fake, it's just a math modifier oscillating it, but it gives the impression like you're live for sure. Here's the system time. So it's 4 p.m. where I am right now. And actually all these graphics are audio reactive. So when I speak, you'll see they jump up and down. I reused this from one of my animations a while ago. I thought that was just kind of an interesting thing because I have a lot of musician friends and I can hear a lot of DJs wanting to do live streams. And I think this would be a great way to make their stream more captivating and more interesting, is adding in some audio reactive notch visuals. And it's really easy to do this if you already have your notch look or your notch system set up. You can literally just take what you have and stream this out. So you don't even have to have an iMag feed. You could literally make like a particle system or a cloner system or some type of audio reactive waveform that you can use to stream out. I was playing some more, and you can even do some fun things like lower thirds and messages. So I have this thing that animates on. You can see I got a message down here, and then I can animate it back off. And I think this is really great because you're starting to get into broadcast style graphics. You could do all sorts of stingers and do like picture-in-picture conferences. You could set up a green screen and do key in and notch. So the possibilities are really endless once you're streaming from a content creation tool. And because Notch is real time, anything you do that's within performance limits will automatically make its way onto the stream. So this here, I'm streaming into OBS, and this should be going onto YouTube. I'm not sure why it's not. Let me just double check some settings here. So let me copy the stream key again. And let's try streaming it one more time here. So I'll give it a second, and maybe I need to refresh this page as well because I already did a stream test a moment ago. And let's see if this works here. And there we go. So you can see I'm on YouTube live with all my HUD overlays and everything's working as planned. So you can just leave your notch running in the background. You could make multiple scenes and do some interesting stuff. And I think this is really powerful. So I hope you guys enjoyed this and learned something new. I certainly did a little bit about NDI and Spout and Notch and how to get that into OBS or Streamlabs. So there's actually not too much Notch stuff in this tutorial. It's mostly just about how you would actually stream this out. So I think Notch would be a great way of handling some of these things and adding graphics. So I'll give you guys this project file and you can play with some of the HUD graphics I've made here. You know, make your own. You can add all the iMag effects and really stylize the whole feed so it looks like you're in some old webcam, outer space, sci-fi scene or something. And I think there's a lot of possibilities you can do with some of your friends and musicians, and even just spicing up your conference calls, for instance. So maybe I'll just start using this for my conference calls. We'll see. So, you know, with Spout, because of that Spout Cam thing, you can actually use Spout Cam in programs other than OBS. So you could reference your Spout Cam from Zoom or from Google Hangouts because they all think it's the normal webcam. So that's about it for me. I think that there's a few things there. If you have questions, feel free to leave them in the comments or shoot me an email or message and I'll try to answer them. So I might use some of these systems to go live at some point in the future and make some Notch stuff. But until then, I hope you had a good one. I hope you're staying well and healthy, and I look forward to seeing you all out there in the real world soon. So stay healthy, take care, and I'll see you soon.